Karl Klausewitz, your host. I want to welcome you all to my podcast, an opportunity for you to listen to your favorites here. We'll talk to real people about their real businesses, real inspirations, real struggles, real ideas, real motives, and more importantly, their real experiences. So are you ready to witness it all? Let's get started. You really got some crazy experience in the world. I'm kind of not sure where to start, except I really want to, first of all, thank you very much for all your service to the country and everything you've done in the military. Really, really huge service there. My dad was in the Air Force, and so I just wanted to thank you.
Well, thanks, Karl.
First of all.
Did he used to get a lot of guff about his ancestor? Did they figure he had
no, I don't think so. People recognize the name like you did right away. But I think that was about all. I'm sure it was probably similar for you having the name of a president.
Yeah, well, not so much. That president was probably our worst president ever. So,
no. So that didn't get you any additional guff, huh? You were okay?
No, although, it was interesting when I went to Puerto Rico for Hurricane Maria, there's a Fort Buchanan that is the only, it was for a while, the only military post on Puerto Rico. The Navy had a pretty big facility at Roosevelt Roads, but that's all closed. And so now it's just Fort Buchanan. But that was not named after the president. That was named after the first commander there right around 1899, I think, or 1900. The first commander's last name was Buchanan, and they named the fort after him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Then I thought, well, am I related to that guy? And no, I don't think so.
Right. So, and that was during your cleanup there in Puerto Rico, right?
Right.
I saw the interview that you did.
When we first got there, it was about saving lives, search and rescue and everything. And then over time, how do we sustain people that don't have water or electricity and all these kinds of things? And we didn't, we did some, you called it a cleanup. We did some things like cut logs and tried to open roads, but it was mostly civilian contractors who were actually hauling away debris and things like that. We were just trying to make things safe. And so the military does those kinds of things. Usually we're just there for, they call it the emergency response, whereas FEMA and other organizations are better suited for long-term recovery, the actual cleanup. We only stay in that case, we stayed for a couple of months. But, in Texas for Hurricane Harvey, we were only in Texas for about 10 days, helping with the emergency response.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I was thinking about early on in your career, it must have been, I think the military, people that go into the military, lots of times they say that they'll either lose their sense of self or it'll strengthen their sense of self in some ways. And what did you find when you really first got started? What was that like for you as a young man?
For me, of course, my father was a soldier and had been, he's a helicopter pilot with a couple of tours in Vietnam. My mom was a school teacher, so service to others was always really important. And in my case, the Army values, the Army has 7 core values. And those values really resonated with my personal values. And that doesn't mean that I'm perfect with respect to those values. I don't think any of us are. But because they matched up with what was the Army's core values and how what the Army valued matched up so closely with my own. It was easy for me to become a wholehearted member of the Army. Those values are loyalty, duty, respect for others, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And so those values, again, they had been important to me all my life. A lot of that had to do with just how I was raised. So it was not anything foreign or different when I joined the Army. It just reinforced how I already looked at myself and looked at the world.
Right. So did you find then when you, how it must have been so difficult to leave on all those tours. I know you went on four tours in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the hard part is with respect to family. Nobody likes to, obviously, to be apart from your family. I missed all three of my kids' senior years in high school. I was gone for every one of those years, but I was able to make it home for the graduation, at least. But I missed all the hard stuff and left my wife to deal with all of that. So the family separation is hard, especially when you're gone for a year at a time or something like that. That's pretty tough. I think frankly, it's easier now. In fact, I saw it was easier my last tour, which was Afghanistan 2015-16, than it was my first tour in Iraq in 2003 and 4 because of technology. Could jump on a computer and FaceTime or Skype or some other call, get through and speak to my family. Whereas my first tour in Iraq, I couldn't. I maybe could borrow a phone.
Yeah, like 90s or something, right?
Right. Well, it was 2003 even.
3, okay.
Make a short call, but we just didn't. Technology, cell phone coverage, Wi-Fi coverage, everything was different in those days. Mm-hmm. Now it's easier to stay in contact than it was. So the answer to your question is, yes, it was hard when it comes to family. It was hard for the mission because I believed it was important and needed to get done, and I was the right guy at the right time and place to make that happen. And I believed in my fellow troops, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines to actually work to a joy to work with these men and women to actually accomplish some pretty tough stuff. The hardest thing for me was when I'd lose one of my soldiers, which happens.
Wow. Yeah.
That, in some ways, at the time, was heartbreaking, and still, is a regret. I mean, that's the hardest part, is losing those you love.
Yeah, for sure. And so I don't know, was it, and then you came back and applied everything that you had done there, I guess, to clean up after some of these disasters.
Well, the job that I had in after my last combat tour, which was Afghanistan 2015-16, I was nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, to command what's called U.S. Army North, or Fifth Army. Fifth Army has a long history, goes back to World War II, was created in North Africa during World War II and responsible for the fight through Italy during World War II. So it's a great organization with a tremendous history. But these days, what Fifth Army or Army North does is it's the Army Service Component Commander and the Land Component Commander for U.S. Northern Command. So my boss was a 4-star Air Force general named Lori Robinson, and she's what's called a combatant commander. and responsible for all military operations in North America, basically the countries of Mexico, the United States, and Canada, to include the Arctic and the Arctic Circle. That also under her responsibility. And I was her Army, we had an Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine component responsible to her. So I was the Army component commander, but I was also the Joint Forces Land component commander. What that meant is if anything was to happen, it was dominantly a land domain mission, I was probably going to be in command of it, which is how I ended up commanding, wildland firefighting efforts, as well as the military response to 5 major hurricanes in 2016, 17, and 18. The U.S. military support of Customs and Border Protection for border security on the southwest border between the United States and Mexico in 2000. So it was yes, I drew on my experience overseas and all those years in the military to command all those troops, not just soldiers, but sailors, airmen, Marines as well, sometimes coasties on these operations, but it was bringing together all that leadership experience for the mission at hand.
Yeah, that's really great that you were able to come back and take on all that additional layer of responsibility after dealing with all that combat, I guess, right? I mean,
oh yeah,
sounds like it's kind of a different ball game.
But some of the principles are the same. So let me just give you an example. We have in the military called unity of effort. How do we bring together, diverse organizations so that they can work together for a common unifying purpose? And this is how I had to operate in Afghanistan. I'll talk about my NATO role, not my U.S. role. The U.S. role was pretty easy because of command authority on U.S. forces. But on the NATO role, we had a coalition of about 40 nations, and a number of them were members of NATO, and a number of them were not. Australia, Georgia, these are countries that were contributing significantly in Afghanistan, but were not part of NATO. Well, you can't, even though I was the director of operations and responsible for operations in Afghanistan at the time, you can't give them orders and expect that everybody's going to follow them blindly. They're going to call, their first phone call is going to be back to their nation's capital. And as it should be, as we would expect it would be. So the point is, how do we work together? And not everybody brings the same thing to these operations. The Danes have different capabilities than the Georgians, who have different capabilities than the Romanians, the Afghans.
Yeah.
How are we going to all work together to ensure the security of this country and the safety of these people? And so bringing that stuff together, I think, was really important. And it was that same philosophy that I took to response to natural disasters. We in the military, in a situation like that, we're not in charge. We're in support of FEMA, who's actually in support of a state, or in the case of Puerto Rico, a commonwealth. Well, I didn't have the authority to direct all of these different agencies to do things. It was more about how are we going to roll up our sleeves and work together to solve some wicked problems. Here's one example: airspace. So over the island of Puerto Rico, we had some really unique airspace challenges during Hurricane Maria's response, because the people that were actually in charge of the airspace were the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, but their radars had been knocked out. So we used some military radars to give them local authority just around 3 airports, but there was essentially nobody in charge of all the area between the airports, and no means of monitoring all that airspace and ensuring that there wasn't going to be a problem. And on the military side, I had 72 helicopters. Those are just mine, but that didn't include, news helicopters or helicopters from the Coast Guard or, Drug Enforcement Agency, because they had helicopters up. So the point was, how are we going to work together to keep from having a midair collision, especially at night? And what we did is again, I didn't have the authority to direct this, but I directed my aviation director to invite everybody in, first of all, so that we could get everybody's concerns, and then establish a system of controlling airspace. So, and it ended up, frankly, it ended up looking like a lot like Fort Campbell, Kentucky, when it was all said and done, because, if you were going to be traveling east, you had to move on certain corridors. And if you're going to be traveling east to west, you flew at 1,000. If you're going to be flowing west to east, you went at 500 feet above the ground. So we're trying to keep the potential just through use of procedures for midair collisions. You could only enter these corridors at certain places. We had 3 east-west corridors, 4 north and south. So it was a way of managing traffic without control through radar. It was just what we call procedural control.
Right.
And we didn't have the authority to tell people to do this, but the point is, everybody saw the need. We worked together. Everybody willingly signed up, and we had 0 midair collisions.
Wow.
But that spirit, the importance of unity of effort, was something that I brought directly from Afghanistan. My experience there to this natural disaster.
Right. So getting people to communicate and work together for a common goal sounds like it helps everywhere almost.
Well, I think so. And, and that is, I think that, obviously it applies across many sectors, government, universities, business, sports teams. How are we together to accomplish something larger than ourselves? And so even if we don't have directive authority over the various entities, if we can unite around a common purpose rather than the task, why are we doing this? What's the effect we want to have? If we can all tie into that, then I think we can be successful.
Yeah, kind of tying into people's motivations of
Right.
their own interest and aligning that interest, I guess, huh? Interesting. So how is this and maybe you could talk a little bit about how this has helped you in the business world now. It seems like now that you're retired, you retired in 2019, I read.
I did, yeah. And I've been doing a little bit of consulting, some teaching, speaking, quite a bit of speaking, dominantly to government and university audiences. I've taught a lot of guest lecture for MBA programs, but I want to get a little bit more involved in the corporate world. Fundamentally, I think leadership it's the principles and big ideas about leadership are pretty universal. The context is different. The context of combat may be different than leadership of a boardroom, but the same principles and ideas I think are important. And based on my experience, I think I have a lot to share, and I can help people learn from my experience as well as I can learn from them. And when it comes to the business world, I recognize that I have a lot to learn about what the bottom line is and how do we get from point A to point B. But at the same time, I think the big ideas on how to inspire people, how to motivate people to do some incredibly different things, I think are, again, the principles are universal. I think I do something to offer.
Yeah, I like that. I was reading about your retreat that you host. I guess you hosted there in Arizona, boot camp.
We have a plan for a couple of times a year, and the idea is to bring in, again, targeting leaders from any sector can come and participate, and learn to do some things that are can be challenging, whether it's dealing with ropes and cliffs or navigating on the land or learning some survival skills, these kinds of things. But frankly, horsemanship, all of those there's something behind each one of them. The idea, let's take the horsemanship. it isn't just about learning how to deal with the horse, to put some tack on and to ride the horse and control it. You know, the underlying motivation for that sector is all about communication. It's about how do you communicate, but maybe even more importantly, how do you listen? How do you understand the sides that are out there? And so communication is always a two-way street. And I believe that listening is a critical skill for senior leaders in particular. How do you listen to others? The climbing and rappelling, it's okay. There's some objective there on overcoming fears and everything, but frankly, it's about learning to trust other people. Because rappel, we're going to do it safely. We're going to have somebody on the rope below you that is belaying, but that person you need to learn to trust. And so there's these underlying themes that are really important about leadership that we intend to bring into every one of these skills that we teach during this weekend retreat. And so that's the big idea.
Wow, awesome. That's really interesting. I like that a lot. Some of the ideas that you're stressing about communication there. That's really cool.
I've been asked a number of times, what do I think is the most important leadership quality? And I think especially, I'll just focus on senior leaders, but for me, it's actually humility. And a lot of times we don't get humility right. We tend to think of humility like modesty, but those aren't the same thing. And I think actually Maya Angelou said it best. She said, you don't want modesty, you want humility. And humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself. So a truly humble person will not come into a room assuming that they are the smartest person in the room. They're going to assume that they have some, a good opportunity to learn from others. And humble leaders have the confidence typically to surround themselves with people who don't necessarily think or act exactly like them. They know that they'll get different perspectives. But if they with this perspective, this important quality of humility, they'll be open to that input. And what I found, over the years, even when I'm in true command and have complete authority, I make better decisions when I expose myself to these different options that might be out there.
Well, yeah.
Now, in the end, I'm still going to make the decision and I'm going to own it. But if I learn from other people, what some options might be, some things that I may not have considered or that I might be blind to, then I know that I will have a better range of options and can actually make better decisions. Really, really important. I think that, the person who thinks that they're always the smartest person everywhere is actually pretty dangerous and not necessarily a good leader, especially at the senior level.
Yeah, I think maybe that kind of also goes with vulnerability. I've heard a lot of people say vulnerability is really important. If people recognize that you're not being sincere, they're not going to follow you.
I think Brene Brown wrote on this, and it's actually, she's written a couple of books about the criticality of vulnerability and leadership. And I think it is a really important concept. The idea that you're not without fault, you're not without failures, you're not without weaknesses. Be vulnerable if you're going to actually seek and accept feedback from others. And
I think that kind of goes with the humility, maybe. Made me think of it.
Absolutely.
So what are your big projects this year that you're excited about? What are you working on now? What are your goals?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I just got nominated by our governor to serve on our Game and Fish Commission.
Neat.
And so tomorrow, actually, I'll have my first meeting with one of our senators. I've got to go through a confirmation process at the state level, which is not completely unlike the confirmation process I used to go through at the national level. But so I'm not a member of the commission yet. Have to first be confirmed by the Senate. But if confirmed by the Senate, then I'll be a member of the commission. I'll actually get to use both my experience and education to help guide the Arizona Game and Fish Department. My bachelor's degree was in wildlife ecology. I've been a bow hunter all my life, or at least 50 years. I've got a passion for conservation and natural resources. And so I think
I was just going to say there's so much need for that right now.
Experience and education together to help both the people and wildlife of my great home state.
Hey guys, that was all for today. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And if you did, don't forget to like it and share it as much as possible. We'll meet here again, same time, same place, but with new guests. You can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube as well. I'm Karl, your friendly life coach, signing off. Take care. Bye.